Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the February Doctoral Student Colloquium. I would like to turn it over to our moderator for today's event, Dr. Larry Kaiser. Thank you so much for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Jamina, and welcome again to the School of Education Doctoral Student Colloquium Series presentation. Again, I'm Larry Kaiser. I'm the Program Director of the Creativity and Innovation Programs in the School of Education, as well as the Associate Director of the Freddie Reisman Center for Translational Research in Creativity and Motivation. And I will serve as the faculty moderator for our Doctoral Student Colloquium this afternoon. We could not be more pleased to welcome our virtual attendees, which include School of Education faculty, staff, and students, the university body at large, community members, and partner associations, among others. The primary objective of the Doctoral Student Colloquium series is to offer current and recent School of Education doctoral alum an opportunity to share their original research as well as learn from their peers, faculty, and staff. Each month, one EDD and one PhD student presents their research at the colloquium. Now, normally the colloquium is offered in a hybrid model that's both face-to-face and on Drexel's campus, as well as virtually through Zoom. However, erring on the side of caution and on the ongoing COVID-19 global pandemic, all colloquium events for the 2021-22 academic year are only being held virtually. The doctoral student colloquium sessions allow doctoral students to better connect with each other while fostering a peer community that is invaluable in supporting their journeys through their programs. Each of our presenters today, Sinead Meehan and Dr. David Sledge, were asked to write a research brief that relates to their presentation. That research brief will be included in an edited publication titled Doctoral Students Research Briefs, which is published on the School of Education's website. The research brief disseminates our doctoral students' research in a common and concise format with a particular relevance to education. Each presenter today will be provided 20 minutes to share their research. Please jot down any questions that come to mind during the presentation so that you may ask them in the brief question and answer period that will follow each of the presentations. At that time, you may unmute your microphone to ask your questions, or you may type your question in the chat area of the Zoom for me to share with the presenter. So speaking of presenters, our first presenter is Sinead Meehan, a second-year PhD student in Drexel University School of Education. Sinead adheres to the belief that science education scholars must consider issues of equity, representation, and identity. Relatedly, her research interests include examining the ways in which teacher preparation and professional development programs can be conceptualized through a lens of equity and social justice, as the field of education and its gatekeepers seek to support K-12 science and engineering teachers. Sinead was drawn to this line of inquiry in part as a product of her experiences as a student, teacher, and teacher educator. Prior to attending Drexel University, Sinead obtained her bachelor's and master's degrees from more traditional teacher preparation programs, a BS in early grades education from Westchester University, and an MA in education from St. Catherine University. However, Sinead also attained an American Montessori Society 6 through 9 credential from the Institute of Advanced Montessori Studies in Silver Spring, Maryland. And she spent 7 years teaching elementary and middle school students at both Montessori and public schools in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York. Currently, Sinead's overall objective in conducting her research is to positively impact how K-12 teachers are supported in thinking about and implementing cultural sustaining pedagogies in their science and engineering classrooms. Sinead's presentation titled this afternoon, Engineering Professional Development for the Elementary Educator, a review of the literature. Take it away, Sinead.
Thank you so much for that welcome, Dr. Kaiser. I think that you probably said it better than I actually typed myself in the bio when I turned that in. So thank you for that. As Dr. Kaiser said, my name is Sinead Meehan. I'm a second-year PhD student at Drexel University School of Education. And today I'm going to be presenting my work entitled Engineering Professional Development for the Elementary Educator, a review of the literature. So this presentation is going to begin with a brief introduction, followed by an exploration of the research problem and the purpose behind this line of inquiry. Then I'll go into the discussion of the research design and methodology employed when engaging in this literature review. And then I will conclude by sharing the findings from this literature review and the implications these findings have on my own research. So ever since the late 1950s, in response to the Soviet scientific advances that were occurring, the United States really began to put an emphasis on STEM education. By emphasizing STEM education, the US really sought to reclaim its spot at the top of the pack as competitors in the global arena, and to increase the number of students interested in pursuing STEM-related fields in order to lead to innovation. Similar messaging was present in Obama's 2011 State of the Union address, where he emphasized the need for the US to really ramp up technological innovation to stay competitive with other nations, spur economic growth, preserve national security, and propel ingenuity. In the field of education, we've seen this translate to a focus on STEM education and the development of students' 21st century skills. The E in STEM has often been excluded from K-12 STEM education. However, in more recent years, with the formation and adoption of the next generation science standards or similar frameworks by 44 states across the country, as well as the establishment of the framework for K-12 science education, engineering-focused practices have become much more visible. Those who research engineering integration into K-12 spaces have found many benefits for students, such as an improvement to their academic performance in math and science, opportunities for students to really meaningfully engage in 21st century skills, students' enhanced understanding of what engineers do, and then also an increase in the number of students who would consider pursuing a career in STEM in the future. So what's the problem, you might ask, because it sounds great, engineering integration in K-12 spaces. Well, the problem really doesn't lie in the pedagogy itself, but rather in the preparation of the teacher, as most remain unprepared or underprepared to engage students in engineering content and practices. The majority of teacher preparation programs in the US require minimal science, math, and technology methods courses for pre-service teachers at the elementary level. And oftentimes, engineering has not been addressed at all. Additionally, opportunities for engineering-focused PD for in-service teachers are limited. So for instance, Banaflower and colleagues found that the majority of elementary teachers received less than 6 hours of science PD within a given 3-year span. And a good majority of those didn't have any science PD at all. This lack of attention to engineering and teacher preparation programs and PD programs is troubling, considering the vast majority of elementary teachers lack even a general understanding of what engineers do and how engineers use math and science, which really leaves teachers with little to no preparation to effectively engage their elementary students in engineering concepts and practices. So to remediate this problem, some schools, universities, and organizations have begun developing and implementing engineering-focused PD in the hopes of increasing teachers' engineering content knowledge and self-efficacy, while simultaneously improving their pedagogical practices. So that leads me to the purpose of this literature review in particular. For my dissertation, I would like to design, implement, and assess an engineering-focused PD for elementary educators. However, before doing so, I really wanted to go out and examine the ways in which educational researchers have already been developing, implementing, and examining the impact of engineering-focused PD for elementary educators, which would hopefully give me a better understanding, again, of what researchers have already investigated, and then where gaps in the literature might be. So what kind of questions are they asking? How are they developing their PD? What does all of this look like? Before I go ahead and share my methods and findings, I think it's important that you know how this line of inquiry came to be. I think Dr. Kaiser actually did a really nice job hinting at some of these things, but I just want to say that first, I identify as a white, able-bodied, cisgender female who comes from a working class family. I am a second-generation American. I went through Upper Darby School District, which is a very close neighbor to Drexel, for my K-12 education, and then I went on to be the first in my family to attend a 4-year college. Between graduating with my bachelor's and the start of my PhD program, I went through a Montessori teacher preparation program, got my master's, and taught 1st to 7th grade students in both public and private schools along the East Coast. As a teacher, I've always loved professional development. I might be the anomaly out there, I'm not sure, the more I read about it. But from this love of PD, I really found, and my combined love of just teaching in general, I found a home in the teacher education world. So the last 4 years, I've worked as a course instructor for Westside Montessori's teacher preparation program, helping to teach courses in biology, language arts, math, and practical life curriculum. And then just this year, recently, I've taken on the role as a teaching assistant with Dr. Klein and Dr. Silverman in the early grades math methods courses, and then also as an adjunct professor for middle grade science methods course. One thing I've noticed as a teacher, again, as the literature kind of hints at, is that very little PD is allocated to science and engineering. And this is just, again, common across the board. Additionally, when we are engaging in PD, broadly speaking, across subject areas, it really, I found, wasn't differentiated to meet our immediate needs as the teachers within the school. It was often lecture-based, short in duration, a day here, a day there, and didn't really draw connections to the specific student populations that we were working with. So they'd oftentimes fly people out, or these consultants who just traveled the country doing these PD, but the PD they were offering didn't necessarily connect directly to, it wasn't coherent with what we were doing in the classroom and with our experiences. So a combination of these life experiences has really led me to situate my work in this realm of teacher education, engineering, education, and critical frameworks. So in terms of the research methods and some limitations, for the methods themselves, I broke my literature review into 3 phases. In phase 1, I conducted a search of the database ERIC. The database scanning produced 193 peer-reviewed articles using the search terms engineering, professional development, and elementary. In phase 2, I conducted an initial screening of all 193 articles by reading the title and the abstracts of each. I then applied an exclusion criteria, which eliminated studies that did not specifically focus on engineering. So there were some PDs out there that just focused on STEM in general or STEM integration, as well as studies that only included middle or high school teachers, which reduced the number of studies for further analysis down to 40. I found that a large portion of the relevant articles were published in School Science and Mathematics, the Journal of Science Teacher Education, and the Journal for Pre-College Engineering Education Research. The final step was that I created a table in Google Sheets that I used to kind of organize key pieces of information from each article, such as the design of the study, the delivery of the PD, and any key findings. As I read through the articles, I kept notes in this Google Sheet, which then allowed me to analyze and synthesize the articles as I read, as well as to compare frameworks, findings, approaches across the articles. Just like any study, my study was not without its limitations. So I am a PhD student, and time is of the essence and very limited. So while this was extensive in reading the 40 articles in this particular literature review, it's by no means exhaustive. So in the coming months, I will continue to do some cross-referencing of other databases like ProQuest and Google Scholar. Additionally, I'd like to take a deeper dive into the studies that were cited within each of these articles and within the literature review or the discussion sections to take a look to see if they would be applicable. And then finally, I think I need to perhaps expand the search terms used. I've learned through this PhD program that finding the right keywords to put in to these searches is an art in and of itself. And so I might just try playing around with some of those search terms and maybe add in teacher education, teacher preparation, elementary teacher education, teacher PD, and just to really ensure that I'm trying to find all applicable studies. So now we get to jump into the fun part, the findings. So in terms of the design of the study, I found it really interesting that there were a nearly even number of qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies. In these studies, the majority of the researchers were investigating the impact the PD had on teachers' general knowledge of engineering and the engineering design process, teachers' attitudes, beliefs, and self-efficacy towards engineering instruction, and then teachers' ability to integrate engineering practices or the engineering design process into their classroom instruction. The most commonly used data collection tools included surveys, questionnaires, knowledge tests, interviews, focus groups, observations, and then the collection of artifacts, things like lesson plans or unit plans. Some less frequently used data collection methods included photos and photo journaling, the draw and engineer test and an accompanying rubric to go along with that, reflective diaries, and research memos and field notes. In terms of the theoretical and conceptual frameworks used, Bandura's self-efficacy theory was used most often. Again, that aligns with the research questions of trying to track changes in teachers' self-efficacy towards engineering instruction as being the primary focus of many of these research studies. Some other frameworks were engineering integration or STEM integration, the nature of engineering, and engineering design. There were also a handful of various frameworks where they were only one study used each of them. One thing that should be noted that I found also interesting, however, is that nearly a third of all the studies failed to explicitly articulate the theoretical or conceptual framework utilized, which left me to just kind of ponder where they were going with their work. In terms of the findings regarding the PD delivery, I found that the focus and structure of each engineering PD really varied. Some researchers tended to address a specific grade, like first grade, a grade range, first through third, or second through fifth, or elementary teachers as a whole. Other researchers, I should say, developed more broad scoping PD programs in which multiple levels were included. So this could be, they might have 2 elementary teachers in the study, 3 middle school teachers, and 5 high school teachers. In these studies, I did find that elementary teachers tended to make up a smaller portion of the overall composition of participants in these PD programs when they were including multiple levels. But I did read those studies and include them in this lit review. The length of PD sessions also varied widely, with some PD sessions lasting just one day, so 6 hours, while others were more than 4 weeks in length, or 152 hours. The majority, however, were a week or less. The focus of the PD sessions were often on engineering STEM integration, again, the engineering design process, and engineering content knowledge. However, other foci included curriculum development, how to use a specific curriculum like engineering is elementary or novel engineering, and then engineering practices as a whole. And then in order to affect change, I might say, in teachers during these PD programs, the researchers engaged the teacher participants in engineering design challenges, lesson planning opportunities, lectures, and dialogue, some dramatic inquiry, modeling and observing, tool development, and discussions with engineers as guest speakers. So sometimes they'd bring them, sometimes it was incorporated throughout the day, and then other times they'd just go out to dinner at the end of a PD program and have dinner and sit down with some engineers and just get to ask them questions. So some overall big picture findings, I found that there were kind of 3 major gaps in the design, implementation, and assessment of these engineering PD programs. First, none of the PD programs approach engineering instruction through a critical lens. And when I say critical lens, I'm thinking critical frameworks, critical pedagogies, and things of that nature. And what I'm thinking here is that, like, due to the increasingly diverse population of US schools and kind of the overall goal of increasing the number of female and minority students we're hoping pursue STEM careers, it's really imperative that teachers understand how to utilize students' own personal identities as the premise for STEM instruction. So you'll find that a lot of the programs that already exist out there prescribe set design problems or engineering design tasks that don't really relate to the students themselves. And so they're not finding their own space in engineering. So I think that by incorporating this critical lens or incorporating critical pedagogies, we might be able to start bridging that gap. Second, the majority of the engineering PD sessions evaluated were geared towards teachers who had little to no engineering experience, which, like I kind of stated at the beginning, is a big problem. However, I also think that given that the NGSS were written and adopted by states almost a decade ago, there are a handful of teachers out there, a handful in comparison to the number of teachers in the whole of the United States, but there are elementary teachers out there who have had a chance to teach engineering over the last 10 years and who might be ready to again engage in engineering PD that really identifies and addresses any perceived or observable areas of need. And then finally, Teacher PD often focus on building teachers' engineering content knowledge, but few really engage teachers in improving their pedagogical practices, thinking about how they might engage students in practices like problem scoping or engaging in argument from evidence, thinking about how to prompt or question students as they're engaging in the engineering design process, or how to assess the development of students' 21st century skills as a result of engaging in the engineering design process. So I found that oftentimes they were taking a breadth, not depth approach, and oftentimes trying to cover all the practices, all the steps in the engineering design process, all the content knowledge, without really diving deeply into any given practice or step in the engineering design process. And so that leads to the implications of this lit review on my own research. Based on the Dartmouth Elementary Engineering PD designed, implemented, and evaluated through a critical lens, I plan to add to the existing literature by utilizing a critical framework to guide the design of the professional development program and accompanying study I do for my dissertation. I hypothesize that one reason why there has been little to no growth in the diversification of STEM fields is because the vast majority of the curriculum and teacher education opportunities that are out there are premised on white Eurocentric norms. And so minority students aren't finding their place in STEM fields or the STEM education realm. Minority students often have to fit the mold of the dominant culture while their own culture is suppressed, oppressed, and or devalued, which really affects their individual identity development. Research has found that when we do value students' cultures by using these critical pedagogies in our instructional practices, students are able to strengthen their racial and ethnic identities, increase their confidence and engagement and motivation in particular subject areas, and increase their academic scores. So in my own research, I don't really want to simply see a change in teachers' understanding of what the engineering practices are or what the engineering design process is, but I really want to see a change in teachers' ability to describe, engage in, and plan instruction around the engineering practices and engineering design processes, utilizing that critical lens. And again, by utilizing that critical lens or incorporating a critical framework in my research and the components of high quality PD kind of as the foundation, I'm hoping that will help bridge the gap between elementary students' engagement in engineering, elementary teachers' perceptions or preparation, I should say, to engage students in engineering, and the nation's kind of overall goal of improving student STEM achievement and increasing and diversifying the STEM workforce to cultivate innovation and fill market gaps. So that concludes my presentation. I do appreciate you all taking the time to listen to my work that's in its preliminary stages. Before I seek any kind of questions or comments, I do want to just thank my sisters in scholarship, Taja, Nisha, Dara, Treya, Karina, and Elena, as well as my supervising professor, Dr. Wright, for their endless support and listening to me do run-throughs and just hearing me repeat this research over and over again. So I really appreciate it. And I'll open the floor then to any questions or comments. I'm almost right on the 20-minute mark.
Thank you, Sinead. And so please feel free to open your mic and ask the questions, or if you don't, if you'd rather, you can put them into the chat and I will ask them on your behalf. But I'm going to start off by asking my own question because I can. The timing of the STEM movement really coincides with the creativity, the resurgence of creativity research, the 1950s. Really, it was the research, when Paul Torrance, the father of creativity, was going into discover, on behalf of the government, was charged with trying to discover why those POWs who survived. And one of the findings was their creativity and able to handle situations, which kind of like led into the government developing the National Science Foundation to begin working on this issue of the space race. They wanted unique, diverse ideas that were appropriate to this problem and issue. So in your research, did anything about creativity come on board, or?
I haven't seen it yet, to be honest, with you, not in this particular, actually, I haven't seen it at all, to be honest. So it's definitely
Look harder.
something that I should look at, but nothing I've read so far has made the connection between kind of I should say not nothing. They do, creativity, I think, is often considered one of those 21st century skills that we're trying to hone in students. And so in that sense, you can consider it perhaps covered or discussed, but not explicitly like you just made the connection out loud. That's definitely something I'll take a look at, because I think it'd be interesting. I just like history in general. So to track those two, the progress of those two movements simultaneously.
Was there anything surprising that you found on doing this literature review, that you had something in your head about what they're looking at and then what they were actually looking at according to your research?
I wouldn't say surprising. I think it's interesting the way each researcher, again, kind of approaches their development of their professional development and what they're kind of looking for in teachers, and how sometimes it was very, again, I think the hardest part of the thing that's surprising to me, again, is that they don't always take into account all the aspects or the research on what high quality kind of PD or effective PD looks like. So sometimes you have one of the kind of components of high quality or effective PD is the duration of the professional development itself. There's no, from what I can find, proven number yet in terms of how many hours that should be. But some say around 80 hours of investment in any given PD. And so a lot of these PD sessions are a week or less, which is about 40 hours or less. So somewhere between 6 and 40 hours, some were only one day kind of PD sessions. So I think one thing that I want to focus on in my own research is really making connections between those aspects of high quality PD and effective PD and the engineering program that I'm hoping to kind of plan out and to try to hit as many. I know you can't do it all, which I keep having to tell myself, because in my world, this would be like a 3-year professional development program where I had plenty of time to jump into each of the practices individually, and it would be quite elaborate. So I keep getting told to just rein it back in. But there's a lifetime of work is what I'm told. So we'll see what eventually comes of this.
Thank you. I'm going through the chat. I don't see any questions being posted there. Does anyone want to open up their mic and ask?
Hi, I'm Tracy Hewitt. I think your presentation was wonderful, really interesting and important. I've done some research myself on STEM in elementary school classrooms and just found that it's just not a focus in elementary school classrooms. In professional development, it's also not something that teachers really talk about or seem to know that much about. And I was wondering, I know you looked more at the professional development side, but I was wondering if you found anything on just barriers to STEM education in the elementary school classroom, because that's something that I've seen a lot. And I'm a teacher as well. I'm a teacher in the Philadelphia School District. And I just think there are a lot of barriers. And I was wondering if you saw anything about that.
Yeah, I definitely did. And even some of these, the literature that I read in terms of even the PD, they investigated teachers' perceived kind of barriers to STEM integration or engineering, incorporating that into the classroom. From my personal experience as a teacher, one thing I noticed is that I make sense of the world by comparing things. And so just comparing different schools that I worked at, and I found that schools in, let me back it up. The more standardized testing or the more pressure there is on the school to hit those markers of being proficient in standardized testing, the less science and social studies really was happening in the school. So in the schools that I was working at, where they were considered, falling behind or not meeting the mark, they primarily focused on math and language arts. And any PD we ever had was on math or language arts. Oftentimes, again, just bringing in new curriculum to try to what I call put a quick bandage on it, or what they thought would be a bandage to the problem. And so it was, every few years you had a new, let's try this math program and see if that helps us raise our scores. Let's try this math program and see if that helps us raise our scores. And so as a teacher, I know that there was a majority, again, just from my personal experience, again, not speaking broadly, but that the more there was a emphasis on the testing part, the less science was included. And if it was included, it was oftentimes like, let's read an article on the solar system. It wasn't that hands-on, engaging them in those like NGSS practices that we want them to do. In terms of the barriers presented here, same things that you probably experienced as a teacher yourself, a lack of time. So again, they wanted to spend 2 hours a day on language arts and 2 hours a day on math, and there's not really much time left then for things like science. Just supplies in general were considered a problem. How are we going to get access to, if we're doing the engineering design process and we want them to be able to physically make a model of their solution that they've come up with, where are we getting the materials to do that? Anyone, again, who's taught with the FOSS science kits in some of these schools is that you teach with the FOSS science kit. It's great until you run out of those material resources that are used up and gone at the end of the day. And so how do you get more of those to continue doing the FOSS science kits? And so I think that was one big thing. And then a third concern, which I thought was interesting, is that they were worried that they had engaged in the PD session, but then when they were worried about any new teachers that came on. So if they have a high turnover at the school, who's going to train that next group of teachers to engage students in engineering? And so those are the three big ones, I would say: the time, materials, and the teacher turnover, and kind of dealing with that and just the support overall.
Yeah, it's not something that is integrated into schools and supported, and therefore, yeah, it's true. You can get one teacher that's like, I'm really into this, but that's not going to necessarily ripple through the whole school. And as someone who is really interested in it, I even find that, yeah, it's the time, it's the materials, and, and then the support as well. So I think that's a huge kind of next step in connection with the PD. That's like a big part of it. And I think it's amazing that you're doing that. And I am just going to have to reach out to you and keep talking to you.
I'll be looking for elementary teachers soon to be participants in my PD. So
I have your email. I'm going to reach out. So anyway, sorry. Thank you.
No worries. But like you said too, I think that one thing that I'll have to do on my end, big push is just going to be to start connecting those standards in the language arts and the math to the work that's happening in engineering, because we know teachers can't really add any more to their plate. So it's kind of going to be a matter of figuring out where this can fit in to their already existing schedules, and how we can kind of cover standards that they might have covered a different way in the past through the engineering design process or engagement engineering. So
amazing. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sinead. Thank you for your responses and your wonderful questions. Nisha left another question in the chat you might want to respond to. I think you answered some of it through your discussion to date. We're going to move on now to our second presenter, who is Dr. David Sledge. Dr. Sledge graduated magna cum laude from North Carolina State University with a Bachelor of Architecture, a master's degree, third in class, with honors in history, theory, criticism of architecture from l'École américaine des Hautes Bleues in France, and graduated summa cum laude with a Doctor of Education degree from Drexel University. Dr. Sledge, Professor Sledge, or sometimes just Sledge to his friends, is a member of Kappa Delta Pi International, where am I at? Excuse me. I think I just deleted the line. So Delta Pi International Honor Society in Education, as well as a recipient of the Frederica K. Reisman Award for Outstanding Graduate Work and Creativity. He represented Drexel University presenting at the 2019 International Conference on Knowledge, Innovation, and Enterprise in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where his published conference paper was awarded second place in the creativity category. Throughout his career, Professor Sledge publishes on topics on a range of activities, including creativity, the history, theory, criticism of design, architectural education. He has worked in architecture firms and taught architectural design and history, theory, criticism for over a decade. He's taught at the University of Knoxville, Tennessee, the Georgia Institute of Technology, l'École nationale supérieure d'architecture de Paris La Violette. I hope I got that pseudo right. Howard University and Drexel University. Dr. Sledge was born at Duke University, which was designed by the pioneering Black Philadelphia architect Julian Abel, the designer of Philadelphia Central Library and the Philadelphia Museum of Art, located beside how Dr. Sledge describes a rustic pavilion designed by Frank Furness in 1866. Professor Sledge currently teaches architecture in Sacramento, California. Today, he will be speaking on his dissertation study, Collaboration, Dialogue, and Creativity as Instructional Strategies for Accredited Architectural Education Programs, a Mixed Methods Exploratory Investigation. You have the floor, Dr. Sledge. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. And Happy New Year to everyone. So I'm going to open up and share my screen. So I assume you can see my screen now. Good.
We can.
It's always good to check. Okay, so I'll move this out of the way. All right, so my talk today is on collaboration, creativity, and dialogue, and it's related to design. And as Dr. Kaiser said in that very nice introduction, thank you, Dr. Kaiser, very much for doing that for me. I have a lot of training in design and education, and I'm focused on architecture education, but the findings, interpretations, and implications of this study go far beyond that and span across several disciplines in higher education. And I also want to say up front that I owe a debt of gratitude to my dissertation committee. Dr. Frederica Ryson was the chair of the committee, Dr. Ulrike Altemuller-Lewis, Dr. Michael Kozak, and also Professor Brad Grant from Howard University. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. So this is a EDD dissertation, so it is not only focused on the theoretical, but also on the practical, the application. And as you can see, when we're talking about architecture education, it's appropriate that we focus on dealing with real world problems that need to be addressed, as well as the larger implications. And so there's a theoretical basis for this study, but it also focuses on a specific need, a pressing need, and a dilemma, actually, and I don't use that word lightly, a dilemma that exists in architecture education, which I'm going to talk about. So architecture education in 2022. Although the United Nations, which is UNESCO, UNESCO is an offshoot of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organizations, the National Council of Architecture Review Boards, and the Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture. So the big three all recommended that training and collaboration should be incorporated in architecture education all the way back in 1969. But the National Architecture Accreditation Board, known as NAB, did not require it until January 1 of this year. So collaboration is not offered as a required course in any of the 136 accredited architecture programs in the United States. Might be a surprise. That's shocking because architecture is a collaborative practice. We architects do the drawings, but we don't actually build the buildings. And there's only been one dissertation that studied collaboration in architecture, and that was back in 2009, also from my alma mater, North Carolina State University, McPeak. Okay, so there's also a scarcity of doctoral level research in architecture, surprisingly. Okay, get rid of that. All right, why is that? The master's is considered to be the terminal degree, like an MFA, but you don't even need a master's to become a registered architect. Just a Bachelor of Architect degree will do. So almost all architects have the Bachelor of Architecture, and then they do an apprenticeship, and then you take the exams and you become an architect. So there's very little research, shockingly little, in architecture, particularly in architecture education. There are only 23 doctoral architecture programs in America today. 23. There's only 4 when I was born in the Ice Ages. And less than 1% of architecture professors hold a doctorate degree in any subject. Less than 1%. And most of those doctorates are in architecture history and urban planning, not architecture education, educational leadership. As a result, many knowledge gaps remain on architecture education in 2022, shockingly so. So what happened? On February 10th, 2020, this board, the National Architecture Accreditation Board, it's their job to oversee accreditation for all of the architecture programs, approved publication of new rules, essentially, that would be published in 2021. And then those new rules went into effect January 1 of this year. So that was called a substantive change. And it is a program criteria for leadership and collaboration. So if you're not doing that by January 1 of this year, you risk losing or jeopardizing your accreditation. Okay, accreditation is very important because, as I mentioned, you must have an accredited architecture degree to become a licensed architect in America in 49 states. I'm currently in the one exception, which is California. Okay, they said architects practice design as a collaborative, inclusive, creative, and empathetic enterprise with other disciplines, the communities we serve, and the clients for whom we work. Okay. Students must understand approaches to leadership in multidisciplinary teams, diverse stakeholders, constituents, dynamic physical and social contexts, and learn how to apply effective collaboration to solve complex, wicked problems. So the new 2020 program criteria for leadership and collaboration, however, was neither further defined than what you see on this slide, nor specified by the NAAB, who must make site visits to all 136 architecture programs to determine if their new requirements have been met to maintain the accreditation. Obviously, this has funding implications, as well as licensing implications for the graduates. This is significant because an accredited architecture degree is required in 49 states to be a licensed architect in America. So as January 1, there's a new rule. It's a substantive change. It's a program change. And this is all they give us. Okay, there's a scholarship gap there, I would say. So what is the timeline of collaboration architecture education? Well, back in 1868, my alma mater, MIT, formed the first architecture school in America. And MIT, you will see, is the research site. And the thinking for that is that from the font of MIT, all architecture schools programs flow in the United States. So that's the site, and this is the beginning of architecture education in America, which was modeled after the French. In 1996, a report was published that recommended collaboration be added to architecture education. Back in 1996, and this is typically called the Boyer Report, shorthand. Then 1997, they started a collaborative practice award. 2009, as I mentioned, the only dissertation that has ever studied this. And then there are a couple of other highlights. And finally, January 1, 2022, the rule is now in place. Everybody has to map that, match that, meet that somehow. So I started with this conceptual framework where I was looking at collaboration, of course, but I also, thanks to Dr. Geller, she introduced me into dialogue, and I took to it like a fish to water. I loved the topic and thought that would be perfect for helping us engage stakeholders, raise questions, and understand what collaboration is all about and improve the quality of architecture education. And I also chose Drexel for the creativity concentration. So as you saw, I have a lot of education in design and architecture. I didn't want to do that again. I wanted to diversify my portfolio, which is good for creative thinking. And when I looked at Drexel, I saw the creativity concentration in the EDD program, and I was like, that's for me. Okay. And then I did a little research and I saw the RDCA and I saw the R stood for Dr. Rice, and I was like, oh, that's definitely for me. So these three are the topics that I was looking at. And in the overlap is where the center, you might say the nexus of the gap is. but there's a gap in each one of these topics. So that became the framework for the literature review as well. So I didn't know what I was going to get here, but you can see the topics where I looked at all of the major thinkers in dialogue. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, that Dr. Otto Scharmer and Dr. Peter Singay are also from MIT. And we teach that at Drexel University. Okay, so the network you can see and the circles are overlapping. So you can see what I'm looking at in collaboration, dialogue, and creativity. And I discovered that there are several theories that relate directly to architecture education. So this is another contribution of my dissertation, bringing creativity, study, scholarship, research into architecture education. There have been scholars in Europe who have done that, some, but not in the United States to the extent that we need. Okay. So the research questions, I have 4. How do architecture professors and graduate architecture students perceive collaboration? That's a qualitative question, and I addressed it with first and second cycle coding of semi-structured interviews. And that was in grounded theory methodology. How do architecture professors, graduate architecture students perceive dialogue? Same methodology. How do the same group perceive creativity? Same methodology. And then finally, what are the self-perceptions of architecture professors and graduate architecture students of their creative strengths as measured by the RDCA? And this is quantitative data, and I was using the RDCA and descriptive statistics. So why graduate architecture students? Because the research site is MIT, and the accredited degree of MIT is the Master of Architecture degree. Okay, and that's typically the highest degree that almost anyone gets, because people who have the doctorate is less than 1%. So this created a concurrent mixed methods research design. Okay, so I have qualitative data and quantitative. You see, because 3 of the 4 questions are qualitative, there's much more data here, right? And so I collected the data, analyzed the data concurrently, then combined the data to merge those results, and then came up with interpretations. Okay, so this is a convergent mixed methods design, right? There have been some scholars that have called this nested concurrent mixed methods design, but essentially it's mixed methods research. Okay, so you can see the RDCA, the Reisman Diagnostic Creativity Assessment, is up on this side, which taps 11 factors which have been shown correlated to creativity. Okay, and those 11 factors from the RDCA became axial codes in the qualitative interpretation. So there's a relationship for the creativity piece directly, 1-to-1. The axial coding here and the 11 creativity factors there. Okay. So this is a matrix showing you the layout of that. So I already mentioned the research questions. So you can see 3 questions for qualitative, the perceptions of collaboration, dialogue, and creativity. And then 1 quantitative question on the creative strengths from the RDCA. So that's the design, the data collection methods, interviews, and then the testing on the 11 aspects of creativity thinking from the RDCA, and then the data analysis, the coding that I used, and then the statistics and the statistical means of analyzing those scores, frequencies, means, standard deviations, etc. Okay. I only use descriptive statistics because my sample is 20, which you'll see in a minute. And this study was done during the pandemic of 2021, and it was extremely difficult to get 20. But thankfully, 20 is the number that all scholars who are experts in grounded theory methodology say that you need. So that gives my study validity. And so with 20, it's the descriptive statistics. And I would also say that since basically no one else has ever done this before, that it is a strong beginning. And it's a study that I will continue here where I am now at Sac State and beyond. The same methodology, the same data collection and analysis matrix. Okay, so you see the sample was 20 here. So what does the RDCA study? There are 11 creativity factors that it taps, and those have been shown to be correlated to creativity, as you can see by the Chrome box alphas. Okay. And this was pioneered by our own and much beloved Dr. Frederica Reisman, and with many other people who helped her along the way develop this, as well as Dr. Larry Kaiser and many others. Okay, shout out to the Dragons. So what is the distribution of the sample? 50% female of the 20. The ethnic graphic dispersion is pretty good too, right? Very dispersed, right? Diverse and inclusive and equitable sample. Okay, so that was intentional so that it clearly represents who we are today in 2020, and it represents the growing reality of architecture, the profession and education. Is now almost 50-50 male, female in architecture. Most people don't know that. So I wanted, the sample reflects, in other words, the reality of the population that I'm studying, okay? And then you see the breakdown with the methodology. So dialogue was qualitative. Creativity is qualitative and quantitative, interviews and the RDCA, and collaboration was qualitative with the interviews, right? The methodology. So the distribution of the research sample. I know I'm going fast, but I want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. And my dissertation is published, so you can all read. So the distribution of the research sample. So I use pseudonyms, which are defined as unisex as of 2021. And that was done to avoid bias and the possibility of identification. So all of these names, they could be male or female, whatever the person chose. We don't worry about that so much. I know the data, but 50% of them are female, 50% are male. You see that there are 6 students in this study that comprises 30% of the sample. And all of the students are from MIT. And they're all in the master's, the accredited master's program. You see that the professors are coming from very esteemed universities: Berkeley, Georgia Tech, Yale, Harvard, Columbia, Harvard, Princeton, UPenn, Catholic, so forth and so on. So it's a very good sample. So I have the prerequisite number for grounded theory, and the sample, the quality of the sample is strong as well. And I already mentioned MIT is the research site, okay? So when we look first at creativity, right? The quantitative part, you see the creativity factors: originality, fluency, flexibility, elaboration, tolerance of ambiguity, resistance to premature closure, convergent thinking, divergent thinking, risk-taking, intrinsic motivation, and extrinsic motivation, okay? You see the Chrome box alphas. You see the total possible scores that you can get from the RDCA. Here are the same pseudonyms for the 20 participants. And then here are their actual scores, the raw data, and then the interpretations. And so I want to focus on the mean scores here. You also notice before I leave this page that the standard deviation is very small. Okay? So the range of scores could be said to be very descriptive of this sample, which is very, very good in terms of representing the population, okay? So if we look again at those 11 attributes that the RDCA taps, you see what the raw score was out of the possible score, and then that comes out to be a percentage. And it was interesting that out of these, flexibility was the lowest and the only one below 80%. That was a surprise. I anticipated that the scores would be high. We're talking about architects, designers, creative people, after all. But I did not anticipate that flexibility, the ability not only to generate lots of ideas, but to generate lots of ideas across disciplines, across domains, right? Open up our thinking beyond just architecture, was the only one below 80%, okay? And it has a strong Chrome box alpha. So the quantitative findings on creativity, I won't go through all of my selected some. There was only a 1% difference between gender for all of the creativity scores that maps the scholarship in the field. No statistically significant difference was found on any creativity factor by ethnicity that maps the scholarship in the field. Only 2 participants, or 10%, had scores interpreted as average. That wasn't a surprise for this sample. No participants had scores in the low or very low interpretation. That was not a surprise with this sample. Okay. Also notice that no participant had a score that was in the extremely high range, what we might call the big C creatives here either. And that's not a surprise either. Okay. And then we also said that flexibility had the lowest score as a percentage of the maximum. Okay. So let's pause from that and look at the qualitative.
Excuse me, Dr. Sledge.
Yes.
You only have a few minutes left, and if you wanted time for questions, if you could do a kind of a wrap up.
Sure. Thank you very much. So the qualitative, I used the coding, we all know that. Here's the RDCA scores, as I showed you before, and from the coding of the qualitative, you see that flexibility also came out the lowest, surprisingly enough. Okay. And so when I organize those to reflect the nuances of the data, you see originality was regarded as the #1 attribute, but flexibility came out the bottom, the lowest, as the weakest factor from this sample. On the collaboration, I found 10 different types, 10 different modes of collaboration. So how are we going to meet the new requirement when there's 10 different kinds? They don't even know it's 10. And cooperation is the weakest. So when I came up with the framework, looking at how this could form a new curriculum, you see cooperation is the weakest of the 10 collaboration strategies. You see for the creativity part, you see flexibility is at the bottom of the 11 attributes that were tapped by the RDCA. And you see the dialogue piece here is added in, right, for meaning making, stakeholder engagement, and again, to pull this back to DEI issues. So if we take a moment to look at that, we have all seen this from Sharma, okay, the smile, okay, for dialogue. And then I created this diagram to reflect my study and my findings, right? This idea of co-creation, dialogue, collaboration, all working together. And that produced this from the research, like my grounded theory methodology, where I'm proposing we need to build the 21st century architecture education with collaboration strategies, dialogue instruction, creativity studies. Okay. Implications and recommendations for practice. Okay. So we need more study. We need much more understanding of flexibility. There should be more testing because there was a lot of test apprehension, which is very common amongst artistic and creative people. We need to really think about using collaboration to encourage DEI issues, right? Collaboration should not only be laterally among students, but vertically as well as they matriculate. Role play was a new form of collaboration that I discovered in this study, and we need much more stakeholder engagement. Implications and recommendations for future research. Research should be conducted in all 3 of the accredited architecture degree programs, the Bachelor of Architecture, the Master of Architecture, and here very, very recent, the Doctor of Architecture, okay? This study should be replicated with a larger sample, of course. A longitudinal study should be conducted to look at the long-term impacts and new pedagogies for role play, this new mode of collaboration coined in this study should be researched and developed. And here's the link to my dissertation. And I leave you with this image. When the first American schools of architecture began at MIT in 1868, all architects looked like this. How does the profession of architecture look today? How does more diversity, equity, and inclusion affect collaborative architecture? The NAB does not address that either. They haven't even thought about it yet. And so we really need to think more broadly, ladies and gentlemen, about how we address these issues and how we use our scholarship. And I'm very excited that Sac State is really encouraging me to do a study across the entire college of the arts and letters, not just architecture, not just the Department of Design, but across the entire college. And it will be the first study ever done anywhere of that scope, magnitude, and focus. So I'm very excited. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Sledge. You know, I really enjoyed the presentation. We'll take questions quickly from people. If you want to open up your mic and shout out the question.
I know that was a lot to take in.
A lot to take in, and unfortunately, because many people are dropping off at this moment in time, because they had other appointments at once. I think it's just fascinating, and I couldn't be prouder to know you, and for the work that you're doing. It's important stuff, and you highlight a lot of great issues that need, and places where people, whether it be architecture or not, might want to delve into it and looking at it in terms of DEI.
Yes. And you know, it's very difficult to do this, ladies and gentlemen, particularly after you've graduated, you've gone out into the world, because this is my passion, obviously. So you're basically asking me to put my passion in 20 minutes, which is very, very difficult to do, because to me, all of it is good and essential. So I know I was going very quickly, and perhaps I went a little over the time. I apologize for that. But again, it's been published, so you certainly can look it up for yourself, and you can contact me. I encourage anyone who has questions to reach out and contact me.
Would you put your contact information in the chat for folks?
Sure.
And again, we'll download the chat before we get rid of it, so that we can have a record of that to boot. But I would like to thank our presenters today, Sinead Meehan and Dr. Sledge, for presenting. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending the Doctoral Student Colloquium event series. The next colloquium event will be a month from now, Friday, March 4th from 12 to 1 p.m. So before they turn it off, I'm going to save the chat for me.
All right, so I've put in both of my emails here at Sac State and also my Gmail. You see it?
Got it.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaiser.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Dr. Rice. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you all for coming. Have a great weekend.
Bye,
You too.
Jamina.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.